Good evening. We are going to start. Now, last week we dove into Ezekiel. I gave you the background. I put you where he was. He's in Babylon. And, you also remember with our chart that you have the three different kinds, how to remember them. There's pre-exilic, there's exilic, and there's post-exilic. And why that is so important is because their messages all have to do with that topic. And it's the easiest way to, first of all, dissect and remember what they're teaching. Because everything before the exile is very much about, that is a big theme, that Judah and Israel are breaking the covenant. And the curses of the exile promised by Moses in Deuteronomy will come upon them, right? But now we are into the exilic prophets. Now, we had one, Jeremiah was the sneaky one who was half and half. Jeremiah was pre-exilic, but then actually lived through it. But most of his ministry, he was an older man at the time, most of his ministry was before. Ezekiel has grown up he was taken as a young man. So he has literally grown up and was called by the Lord in exile, in Babylon. There's two exilic prophets, Ezekiel and there's one other one. You've already read it.
Jeremiah.
Daniel. Daniel. Okay? And then we have the post-exilic prophets that are Zechariah, Haggai, and Malachi. Okay? But it's important because Ezekiel talks about, now, you're also wondering, if Ezekiel is growing up in Babylon, in exile, why is he talking about exile coming and the Babylonians coming? Well, in the beginning, you notice that that's a major theme. Now, one of the main things to remember there is because he was taken in one of those first waves. While he's ministering in exile, there still is the nation there in Jerusalem, in Judah, under Babylonian control. Nebuchadnezzar has already replaced the governor, with king, but under his control 3 times, right? And they're now under the yoke of Babylon. And what happens is that then Babylon tries to come in and they stage a rebellion against them and lock the thing down, and then of course Babylon starves them out and then obliterates them, right? The point is that they were under Babylonian control for a while, for a good 40 years, 30 years, okay? More like 30 years. And from the very first time they came until the destruction fully happened in 586. Does everybody understand that? I think actually it was, yeah. So that's a really important point. I think it was 616 when they first came, actually. My brain is telling me. So they replaced Jehoiachin, and then there was Jehoiakim, and then there was Zedekiah was the last one put in, right? And they're all supposed to serve the king of Babylon. But then Zedekiah stages a rebellion, listens to these false prophets, and we know what happened, right? So Ezekiel, although he is in exile, he was in one of the first gleaned waves that went, but the whole of the nation hasn't yet. Does that make sense? So, halfway through his ministry, it happens, and then he prophesies for time afterwards, while they're in exile. Okay? So anyway, we went over a lot of that, and it starts with him being called by God. We already went through that last week. We can skip chapter 1. And we went through him laying on his side and all of that, so we can go to chapter 4. Okay? And we went through a lot of this last time, but we're going to quickly read through some of the notes. I mentioned this, I taught this, but we didn't have the notes, so I'm going to quickly just read through them, all right? And then we're going to get into talking about it a little more. I did actually go over some of this last week, but I want you to go through the notes. Chapters 4 through 24, prophetic parables. The section from chapters 4 through 24 is filled with prophetic images of the impending judgment on the city of Jerusalem and for the rebelliousness of Judah. There were many false prophets in Judah at this time, as we know from Jeremiah's life, who opposed this message and who were prophesying that everything was going to be okay. The siege, chapter 4, Ezekiel is told to illustrate the siege against Jerusalem by placing a brick on the ground and writing Jerusalem on it. Remember we went through this, how he had to make this whole model, and he had to do it all in public, right? And when they ask what it is, then you tell them the message. But they will never forget what you were doing. So the visual became more powerful than the word itself, right? And that was the point. Construct siege mound and lay siege against it and prescribed number of days for the sins of Israel and Judah. This was the depiction of the coming siege and destruction of Jerusalem, which took place in 586 BC. From the final generation. This is Dad's first eschatological book that he wrote in 99. It was funny to think about it that long ago, but that's what it was. I remember him doing the research for this book, watching him every night while I was sitting there with an acoustic guitar before I got married, watching him with his stack of books. Me and him would be there till 2 a.m. I'd be just playing guitar, and he's going through his books and throwing out random things to me every once in a while. Yep, we did that for a long time. Then I got married, and right when I got married, he wrote the book. The book came out. Okay? That was a long time ago. And anyway, so I know some of you have been around for a while, heard of it, but who has ever heard of the Final Generation book?
Yeah.
You have, Brandon. Even though you were alive. You were just a baby. But yes, you were alive. Well, anyway, it's still worth a read. Now, if you've been through the eschatological book and you've been through this, it's all that stuff. It's got more detail in it now. So that was just the opening. He's added a ton more to it now, and then the textbook has a lot more. And then the 7 keys really takes all of it and puts it in a real. So if you've read those, you're not going to get a ton from it, except for it was the first. So it was, nostalgic. Right? But anyway, these notes are that old that they're going back to the Final Generation. All right? 70 years prophesied Jeremiah. Now remember, this is an incredible prophecy. It's worked out in the Final Generation. I remember this is one of the things when I was a teenager that really grabbed a hold of me. It's one of those haunting evidences, which I love, of the accuracy of the prophetic scriptures. Okay? You've gone through this in eschatology. In the book of Ezekiel, we find this incredible prophecy with regard to the time period and punishment for the Jewish people for their failure to genuinely repent and turn back to God as a nation. The prophecy states that God has determined 430 years of punishment, apparently, beginning with the deportation to Babylon in 606 BC. That is when Ezekiel was taken. Okay? I said 616, but it was 606. As for you, lie down on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. Now, we went through that, so I'm not going to read all that again. Skip down. If we subtract the 70 years of captivity in Babylon, we are left with 360 years of punishment for the Jewish people. This would suggest that 360 years later, in 176 BC, would be free from their own land. However, we know from history that in 176 BC, they were about to suffer the most cruelly under Antiochus Epiphanes, or some would say, Antiochus Epiphanes. That's what, some professor types like to say it that way. We like to say Antiochus Epiphanes. We're,
Yankees.
Anyway. Yeah, we're Yankees, but anyway. It probably is Antiochus Epiphanes, but whatever. What then is the meaning of the extra 360 years? The answer seems to lie in the words of God spoken through Moses in the wilderness. Now, when we went through this a long time ago, I explained all this to you then. So now this is a refresher. But, of course, it's probably hard to remember all of that. But you remember, I'm pointing out to you, remember, what's the point? And part of the covenant was, then I'll give you, and if you still do not listen, I will punish you 7 times more for your sin. Right? And Moses said that a bunch of times. So look at Leviticus 26:18. If also after these things you do not obey me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. Yet in spite of this is a different place in Deuteronomy. Yet in spite of this, if you do not obey me, but act with hostility against me, then I will act with wrathful hostility against you, and I will punish you 7 times for your sins. I will lay waste your cities as well, and will make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not smell your soothing aromas, and I will make your land desolate, so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled over it. You, however, I will scatter among the nations, and will draw out a sword after you, as your land becomes desolate and your cities become waste. So Moses already laid the whole scenario out. Then they came back, okay, in 516, they came back, okay, and for the first wave under Zerubbabel, sent by Cyrus, okay, then all the way to Nehemiah until the wall is built. But you see them constantly having to turn them back, and then we have Zechariah and Haggai, and we go through them prophesying to the people, come back to the sanctuary, you're building your own houses and you're neglecting the house of the Lord. And of course they did not come back with the whole heart. And it was short-lived when they started to already go right back. Even when they did for a little bit, they went right back into their secular ways, right? And the answer is clearly spelled out by Moses. Then they were punished 7 times more. Because Antiochus came in, or Antiochus, however you would like to say it, came, and that's of course where the story of Hanukkah comes from, of Judas Maccabees. Okay, and again, it's funny because I've been to Israel and then I get their names, the real way to say it, because it's Yehuda Maccabi. That's really how you would say it. So my brain always is not sure which one to say. But we'll say Judas Maccabees. Okay?
Keep your stick on the ice.
Yes. Okay. So anyway, with the Maccabean revolt, and of course, though, they then became right under Roman control. So they didn't live autonomously, for a very, very tiny little bit of window there, where finally the Maccabean army, you could say guerrilla army, pushed them out. It was very short-lived, and here come the Romans and just destroy everything, take over everything. All right, and so anyway, of course, then. The Romans were fulfilling the 7 times. All right? And they were punished 7 times more for their sin. Then, of course, under the Roman rule, roughly 100 years later, they were scattered through all the nations. And everything was destroyed in 70 AD. Right? Okay, so, but what's interesting is just how clearly it follows that pattern. So, God warned the people that if they're entering the land of promise, they refused to obey him, he would punish them 7 times more for their sins and scatter them throughout the nations. When the Babylonian captivity ended, only a remnant of the Jewish people returned to the land, and even those who returned had to be stirred up by the prophets to be committed to rebuilding the house of God. They were preoccupied with their own pursuits, Haggai 1:4. Their hearts were not fully given to God. Therefore, God multiplied their punishment 7 times more for their sins. Thus, Israel was to be dominated for another period of 20 years. 2,520, obviously. Keeping in mind that the biblical prophetic year is 360. Why is that? The Lord's year was 360 days, not 365 and a quarter, right? And what is the difference between those two? 5 and a quarter? The sun and the moon, right? Israel was given the lunar calendar, and all the other nations worshiped the sun. Okay? And but also, the 360 is the circumference of a circle. And it was a perfect mathematical cycle. Okay? 365 and a quarter, you have to mess with the math, and it gets all jumbled up.
Then you get a leap year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the Lord gave them the perfect 360, right? So, and that's a thing that a lot of people do with years, and a lot of even, you could say, eschatological teachers, and they try to follow biblical prophecies, and they use a Roman calendar. You cannot use the Roman calendar. You need to use the Mosaic calendar and then transpose it into our calendar to try to figure it out. Right? You start with the Roman calendar, you're never going to get to the right place. Well, anyway, so, I've seen just people do that, and they mean well, but I could immediately, when I start hearing that, I'm like, okay, well, my ears are open to a little bit of ignorance there, even though they mean well. God bless them for even trying to teach eschatology and trying to care about the day we live in, because so many don't. Right? So, let's go back. I left 360 days long, as there is only 1 year between 1 BC and 1 AD. We can calculate when the Jewish captivity was supposed to end. When we work it out, result is truly remarkable. From the spring of 536 BC, when Cyrus issued his decree for the Jews to return until the rebirth of the Jewish state in May 1948, we have exactly 2,520 prophetic years. Incredible. It's awesome. Of course, the Lord is a mathematician and fulfills everything literally. We shouldn't be surprised by that. But so many are for some reason. Okay, just like if you work out Daniel's prophecy, it points you right to Jesus, but of course they had to change it because they were freaking out, because it so points to him, right? Okay, so, but it's a truly astonishing 1948, we know Israel was born. Again, right? Chapter 5. Ezekiel is told to shave his head and beard and to use his hair as a symbolic for the house of Israel. It was a prophetic depiction of what was to come. Now, we already did this, so I'm not going to dive all the way back in this. So just jump down to chapter 6 and 7. So I think we ended pretty much with chapter 5 right around there last week. So, okay. Judgment on the mountains of Israel for all the wickedness performed there. Yet there's a promise of restoration, that the remnant would be protected among the nations and would turn back to him. Disaster is promised as a result of continual idolatry, and nothing can be done to avert it. Even according to the words of Huldah to the King Josiah, reiterated by Isaiah towards the end of his career, but then also Jeremiah, right? So, chapter 6, I read that part. Chapter 8, while Ezekiel is sitting in the house with the elders of Judah before him, he has another vision of someone resembling a man. Verse Ezekiel 8, I looked and I saw a figure like that of a man. From what appeared to be his waist down, he was like fire. And from there up, his appearance was as bright as a glowing metal. He stretched out what looked like a hand and took me by the hair of my head. The man stretched out his hand and snatched Ezekiel away and took him to the temple in Jerusalem, where he showed him all the things the people were doing in the temple and defiling it with idols. And what's interesting is that he's in Babylon. And he's now been taken to a vision into Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And of course, if you remember, he's going through and he shows them all the wickedness, and that they're turning their back to the temple and bowing down to the sun. Okay, which is Baal worship, was involved in sun worship. And all of that is happening while he's watching in the Temple Mount. Chapters 9, 10, and 11. The executioners are called, 6 men from the north with his shattering weapon in hand. And among them is one clothed in linen with a scribal case in his hand. The glory of the Lord went up from over the cherubim where it had been to the threshold of the temple. Then the Lord told the writing angel to go throughout the city and put a mark on the forehead of all who groaned over the abominations of the temple. Very interesting. It was, and there was like barely anybody who cared. Now, it was interesting. He sends them to go out now through and see who is noticing the evil that they're doing. You notice those that were grieved were given the mark. showing, does anybody notice the wickedness that is happening on the temple and in the temple? It was an incredible picture because they're looking, I was kind of, always when I go through this, I'm reminded of Abraham with the Lord and talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. If there's 50, if there's 40, if there's 30, if there's 20, if there's 10, right? And they're not looking for who they can punish, they're looking for who they can save.
Right.
But it's sad. The ones with the weapons drawn were told to go forth and slay all who did not have the mark. See the repeat of the marking on the forehead of both God's remnants and those who turned over to the Antichrist. Of course, it lines up perfectly because John, the Revelation, John was the last of the Hebrew prophets, and it goes right with Ezekiel and right with Zechariah and Isaiah, right? And that same language of the markings put on the remnant and on the ones by the Lord who were marked for him. Okay, it's pretty awesome. Ezekiel was the only one left, and he cried out to the Lord. Ezekiel was in exile, and he represented the remnant who would be in exile. Then in chapter 10, Ezekiel describes the cherubim again, and the glory of the Lord departing, and the temple hovering over the eastern gate. The man dressed in linen is told to take the coals of fire from between the wheels and scatter them over the city. It was a sad thing because Ezekiel was waiting, go out and find the ones. And they didn't find anybody. Meaning that they were complicit in what was happening. Very sad. Then in chapter 11, as the glory hovers over the eastern gate, Ezekiel is lifted up and shown the 25 men who were leaders of the people and who had their backs toward the temple, a sign of dishonor, and were facing east toward the sun. Now this is all in the same vision, which is idol worship. Then Ezekiel is told, if there's a typo there, mine is corrected, is told to prophesy against them. They think they are secure in Jerusalem, but the Lord says they will be cast out. Chapter 11 through 14, the word of restoration came to Ezekiel. The Lord promises to bring back a remnant to the land and fill them with the Spirit. The first part of the restoration has taken place, and we are now in the phase where God is about to fill them with His Spirit. Now, of course, we get a much deeper vision into that same thing in later on in the Valley of the Dry Bones in Ezekiel, one of the most profound pictures of the scattering, regathering, and the end of the age. It's awesome. But actually, this has got the same message in this prophecy, same meaning as that, and that comes later on. That's just but they line up very much there. Okay. Ezekiel 11, therefore say, thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you on the countries from which you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. When they come there, they will remove all its detestable things and all its abominations from it. And I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them. And I will take the heart of stone out of their flesh and give them a heart of flesh, that they might walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them. Then they will be my people, and I shall be their God. Now, of course, that was also reiterated in Jeremiah. Remember? That the new covenant was also spoken of in Jeremiah with the write their laws on their hearts. Okay? And they totally correlate. And of course, their contemporaries preaching and speaking the same prophetic message, separated, one in Jerusalem and one in Babylon. And that, of course, is the new covenant. We went over that when we went in Jeremiah. Then the glory of the Lord left the city and hovered over the Mount of Olives. The vision left Ezekiel, and he found himself back in Babylon, and he told the exiles all that the Lord had shown him. Now, what's very important, too, is that, remember with the new covenant, that the new covenant was prophesied. It wasn't just randomly a new covenant.
Right.
We have Jeremiah and Ezekiel both prophesying, and of course, even Daniel, the bearer of the covenant, right, would come. And Moses, on Deuteronomy 18, I'll raise a prophet like you from among your own people. Whoever will not listen to him will be cut off. And him being the prophet who will bring them the new covenant. Okay, so it was very much there. It was not veiled. that the Lord would give them a new covenant. All right, that's an important theological detail because, as you see that Christianity is the new covenant. It's not a separate religion. It's the fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Does everybody get that? And you say, well, that was to the Jews. But of course, the point was that we were brought into that covenant through faith in Messiah. But it is the new covenant. It is our covenant. Okay? And man will not say to his neighbor or to his friend, know the Lord, for they will all know me. Meaning he will reveal himself to whoever wants to find him. Does everybody understand that? Okay. Who, when you were going through this, knew that was a new covenant? Good. But now I want you to get that as a value, something that got in there. Not that you have to remember the whole thing, but just remember that the new covenant was prophesied. All right? It was not something that came out of nowhere. It was not some thought-up idea. All right?
That was the whole point. Jesus came to fulfill. Yes.
But there's a lot of Christians, you've heard me say this before, but it's true, and I just saw a thing recently that was so just backing this up. A lot of Christians, even Christian leaders, still see Christianity as separate completely from Judaism. See it as a completely different religion. And the truth is, Christianity cannot be separated from Judaism. Modern Judaism is completely off, but a lot of modern Christianity is off. Okay? But the point is that Christianity cannot stand without Judaism. Just like the New Testament cannot stand without the Old. It's not a standalone house. It's built on something.
The touchstone is God chose the Jewish people.
Well, absolutely. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You cannot have made it this far and not have gotten that by now. But I still want that to see how important that is to get it, because you realize a lot of Christians do not believe that, or even some don't believe it, some have just never heard it, and a bunch just don't understand it. Okay? But Christianity cannot stand alone. I've already pointed out to you how many things are mentioned in the New Testament that aren't even explained, because you're supposed to already know.
Yeah.
Right? So the point is, you can't just take the New Testament, like many tried in the past, take the New Testament as a separate thing and divorce it from the Old Testament. Now, we're stuck in those terms. That's why Dad many years ago tried to go to the Hebrew Scriptures and the Greek Scriptures. But me and him use that line to each other, but if we try to use it with other people, it's just, they don't. So we're stuck. It's like trying to get rid of the name Easter. Someday in the millennium, we'll finally kill it. Right? But the point is that, when we say old and new, we still even kind of proclaim that by saying it. Okay? Meaning, anyway, the point is this. The New Testament cannot stand alone. If you just take it and just pick it up, just think about it. From what you've even gathered, you're going through the Gospels right now, right? Are you done with the Gospels?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you're doing Ephesians and Colossians. Okay?
Acts.
We're finishing.
You're doing Acts.
Yeah.
Okay. Acts is great. So you're just take what you've learned so far now, going through the Gospels and going through Acts. Do they stand alone? If you just took them and picked them up and just started reading Matthew, how much would you get of it? How much would make sense?
You don't have the context, you can't get any of
It's not standalone. It doesn't give you the beginning of the story even. It jumps you in the middle of a story. Doesn't it? It's like, starting at the end of a movie. It doesn't work. Now, of course, we know that. I know I'm not saying anything you don't know before, but I just want that to really click on the inside of you. All right? Become a value that you have. So that when you hear it, you recognize it.
You just want to access.
What did you say?
You're just axing.
Axing, yeah. A pet peeve of yours, huh? Did they say that in Tennessee, or is that a New York thing?
It's in the Bible. It's right before Romans.
That was good. Okay. So anyway, the point is, though, you have to see. No, obviously you got the point. I just made it 16 different ways. I just want you to see why it's so important. The reason why, with repetition, I keep pounding that into your hearts is that I want that to become something that is ironclad. Not so that you can get arrogant with people. That's not the point at all. The point is simply that you will recognize it when you hear it.
Amen.
That is the point, right? And maybe God will give you an opportunity to help somebody else to see it. Right? Okay. So, that brings us to, then the glory left the city and hovered over the Mount of Olives. The vision left Ezekiel, and he found himself back in Babylon. He told the exiles all that the Lord had shown him. Preparing for exile, chapter 12. Ezekiel is told to prepare his bags and go somewhere through the hole in the city and the wall in Babylon and pretend that he is going into exile as a sign to the people of the coming exile of the Jews of Jerusalem. Prophecy concerning Zedekiah being taken into the land and losing his eyes. Jeremiah prophesied the same exact thing. They both prophesied that Zedekiah... Now Ezekiel doesn't say his eyes will be taken out, but he says he will be taken and he'll never see. Like, how could he be taken and never see it? He'll keep his life. He'll lose everything and be taken and yet not see. So he was obviously shown a vision of him like blindfolded or not seeing, and and he gave that. Of course, it was so detailed, fulfilled. His eyes were plucked. I mean, who would have thought that? Right? So how could you go be taken there and never see it? So pretty awesome. See, I always love to think of what did the prophet actually see? What did they really see, experience? What did they hear? Because it's not, because we kind of get it like, oh, the Lord she saw the whole thing. Like he was just sitting down in a movie theater, just saw everything happen exactly and everything. That's not how it works. All right? He doesn't get all the things he's prophesying. He doesn't understand them all. Right? But he is trusting. He is trusting the Lord here, and he's seeing glimpses and visions, and he's seeing things that he is decoding, and he might be seeing some literal things, because I've had a lot of prophecy that I have to deliver the message, but also sometimes I've seen a very vivid, clear picture too. So that can happen as well, right? I think of it in curiosity is what is he actually, because like with the seraphim, he's just describing what he sees. He doesn't even really know he's just describing it. Right? He doesn't really have a grid to even put it in. It's awesome. Okay. And of course, yes, Jeremiah and Ezekiel are contemporaries, and they both prophesied this concerning Zedekiah. Okay? But I love he has to go out every day to the exiles. Now, the exiles are sitting there, and they're all believing these false prophets that are saying they're going to be sent back, and they're going to go back to... And remember, Jeremiah then prophesied to them, put down roots and plant and marry and be given in marriage and build a house and bless the place where you're at so we'll go well with you. Remember? Yep. And he got slandered, and one of the exiles, the leaders of the exiles, wrote this thing back to Zedekiah about how Jeremiah is disturbing them all by telling them to, get used to being there and build a life there. Yep. Because they're all sitting and waiting just to go back to Israel. Go back to Jerusalem. It's not going to happen. All right? So Ezekiel is prophesying the same thing, but in a different way. The Lord is telling him to act it out. Every morning, go up with your bags packed, go to the wall and start puncturing through it. And then in that also, he prophesies that the king will try to slip through the wall. And of course, so they come out, Ezekiel, what are you doing? What's going on? And then he tells them the message. I wonder what his poor wife thought. Chapter 13, prophecy against all the false prophets trying to deceive Judah, saying peace, peace, when there is not peace. So you can see how much, at the beginning of Ezekiel's ministry, the Lord is speaking the same thing to him and Jeremiah, even though they're in two different places. So what is the message so far of this point? So far? You know it, it's right on the tip of your tongue.
That they're not going anywhere.
Yes. Well, what is the message that's being said right now to Judah and even to the exiles? It was the main theme of the book of Jeremiah. Babylon is coming, right? That's what that was just about. Okay. Peace, peace, when there is not peace. Their words are likened to whitewashing a wall that is about to be torn down. The Lord promises to pour out wrath on them. Chapter 14, verses 1 through 11. The elders come and sit before Ezekiel to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord told him to prophesy and tell them to put away idolatry from their hearts. The Lord himself promises to speak to the one inquiring in person, and that a prophet who speaks false will be judged by the Lord. Both inquirer and the prophet will be judged. So inquirer, yeah, those who seek false things will also, right? Who give them an audience and listen to them. Very interesting. I always kind of, I took a while going again through this one, and this one was standing out to me, this chapter. Because Ezekiel is told while they're sitting there talking to him, the Lord tells him that they have false motives, and they're not, they're hiding all kinds of things, and they're listening to this and that, and they were not being genuine. And then he speaks this word to them about listening to false prophets, and that they will receive punishment. And also those who give them an audience will as well. Verses 12 through 23, the same message is spoken another way. When God brings calamity, only the righteous will be delivered. Now, I love this one. Now, this one is very important. It's also, this one is also majorly theological. I had brought this up to you before, a long time ago. It was the beginning of last school semester, the first year. And because, remember when we went through Job, and I told you that people now who say, try to take away the theology of Job, have to throw it out as Job just being a poem, right? Except for two places literally where he's mentioned as a real person, which is, of course, here. And James in the New Testament, remember Job. When they were talking about how persecuted, how hard life is, he told them, remember Job. Saying, it hasn't gotten that bad yet, has it? Right? So, but anyway, Ezekiel mentions Job by name. Noah, okay? It's interesting, the choices. Two from, Noah, of course we know, and then Job from the patriarchal time, and then a contemporary. That's how much renown Daniel has received now. All right? Now, I love this one is interesting because he says, if these three men were there, Noah, Daniel, and Job, I still wouldn't listen. I still wouldn't turn back from what I planned to happen to Judah. They would keep their life, but they could not save them. That is a pretty powerful statement. All right? What's really being said here is the Lord is making a contrast. That these men, that the Lord, we know how much the Lord feels about them and how the favor of God that they received, right? But yet, even in that, they could not, if they were there right now, they couldn't turn this around. That is a pretty strong statement, right? But of course, I always focus on the theological part, which means Job is a real person. They will not be able to save anyone else through intercession. God says that even if Noah, Daniel, or Job were there, they would only be able to save themselves. And then Dad writes, notice that Daniel's righteousness was well known to the exiles. Very interesting. But that just shows the honor that he has incurred among the exiles. The useless vine, chapter 15. This is an illustration of how useless Judah and Jerusalem have become because of their iniquity and are only good for the fire. It's really, again, it's really just a vision concerning that they're how wicked they've become and how corrupt they are. God's heart of love. Now, that brings us to chapter 16. I'm going to stop there and we're going to look up for a little bit. Chapter 16, what did I have you read to, by the way? 20? So I only have 4 chapters left, so I better take my time. That's good, because I'm going to take some time on this one. Chapter 16 and chapter 23 are similar. Chapter 16 especially, though, many years ago, going through this class now, I remember really getting hit hard with this chapter. It kind of broke something in me. I ended up just, some revelation came to me. And you can say, how could you get such revelation from such a horrible chapter? Right? Because chapter 16 is the bleeding heart of God. Now, let me refresh your memory if you don't remember what 16 is about. He starts telling the story of Israel and how when he first saw them. And he explains it as a baby, that they were neglected. And he's talking about, Abraham. He's talking about, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's seeing them like they were kicking around in their blood and no one cared about them. Right? Meaning they were an infant left. Meaning that they were nomads. They were wanderers. Right? Okay, when I saw you kicking about in your blood, it's a picture of this abandoned baby who he takes and he cares for. And no one cleaned it off. So kicking about in the blood means no one rubbed you, no one washed you. You were sitting there like you came out and were rejected. All right? And he takes them and washes and cares and takes her as his own. And then raises her and then sees when she's old enough for love. Okay? Now, of course, it gets a little graphic there, but the Lord isn't ashamed of the way the body grows, right? He's not offended by those things. Okay? And and it says, then when I saw that you were fully formed and you were old enough for love, I spread my cord around you, meaning his garment around it, and you became mine. And you were the most beautiful. And it's so just intimate and full of, it's nothing but pure emotion. That he feels, and see, the thing is, how can he feel this way? What is captivating to me is the love of God is so clearly displayed. That he feels so strongly about them this way. That he loves them and takes them as his own, and he rejoices over them, and he wants us to see it in the natural terms. God uses the natural terms so that we can get it. You understand what I mean by that? He uses babies and marriage and a man falling for a beautiful woman and becoming one. He uses all those terms not because he just, he designed them and he uses them because they are how those feelings that those things arise are what he wants you to have. He wants you to get that he feels about them that way. Does everybody understand? Mm-hmm. So saying, it's just an allegory. Well, yes, but it's an allegory that is meant to teach you a lesson. That is, God feels this way about them. Right? So he loves them and he takes them as his own and he adorns them with beauty and becomes the most beautiful and showers them with gifts. Right? And he rejoices over her. And then it changes. And it gets worse, and then it gets worse, and then you think it got bad, and it gets worse. And you lavished your lovers, and you started to lust for others, and you prefer strangers to your own husband, and it just keeps getting more and more graphic, right? And then he calls her a prostitute, and then he says, you weren't even like a prostitute because a prostitute desires payment, but you lavished your favors for free. I told you it's adult. Could you handle it, Brandon? Did you live through it? Mm-hmm. Okay. But there is a reason why we don't have 11-year-olds in the class, right? Because it's pretty graphic. When you get to 23, you only go to 20. 23 is even more graphic. But the point here is that, and of course he continually calls her, you adulterous wife. Why do you reject me? Why? What have I done to you but love you and care for you? And it's just this emotion. It's pure emotion, how he just is brokenhearted. And that's what, years ago, I'd say probably 8 years ago or so, I really got hit so hard going through this book that I've never been able to forget it. I kind of just, I had a couple dreams and things, and I something snapped on the inside of me about the love of God. And you say, Well, you talk about the love of God and the love of the Father, you'd be using John 1. Or you're getting it from Ezekiel? But yes, it's exactly where I'm getting it from. Because it's the pure, unadulterated emotion of the heart of God and how he feels so deeply. Because isn't it a wonder how can the Lord, the creator of the universe, make himself vulnerable that he can feel this way about men? That he can feel this way about mankind, that he can allow himself to be so hurt. That's an amazing thing. We wouldn't do that. Think about that from a logical perspective. If you were the creator of the universe and your creation, would you make yourself vulnerable so they could just break your heart all the time? Would you? I'm thinking about logically right now. Does that seem smart? Because you know what are they going to do to you? That we're already learned. Once you hit 20 years old, you already learned enough to keep yourself guarded because people always want to hurt you. Isn't that true? Right? You just learned that from being out in the world for a couple of years. Well, imagine, he knows us. He watched us reject him. He knows what we would do. And yet, he has allowed his heart to be vulnerable, to be hurt. Now, I've said this before, obviously. I said it last year in the beginning of Genesis, but I want you to see it. Something clicked in me with a fresh revelation of the love of God in a different way than a lot of people talk about the love of God. People like to talk about the love of God, but they talk about it in a non-personal sense. Right? Kind of like, a computer system can be programmed to be nice and kind, and that's love. Well, no, that's not the love of God at all. The love of God is a personal, emotional, affectionate love. And he feels. Something happened to me that changed me from the inside then. And it wasn't like I didn't know the love of God. I even taught the love of God. But something happened on the inside where I started to realize how much God feels. Now, he feels when I love him. He feels when I worship him. He feels when I care. And then he feels when I don't. You know what I mean? And you're saying you're getting all this from this, worse than a prostitute chapter? Seems like an odd place. But it's because, you don't always get the pure, unadulterated, raw emotion that you get here. All right? The love of God. And then, of course, he's brokenhearted and she's worse than a prostitute and she neighs over everyone and wants everyone else but her own husband. Even then, he cries out to her, why? Why don't you love me? Why can't you? What have I done to you? And then he turns and then he gets angry with her and he punishes her and he exposes her. Yes, it's graphic. Right? He exposes her sin, he exposes her nakedness, and he shows her vileness and punishes her and takes it all away from her. But then at the end, and I will relent, and I will no longer be angry. Meaning he couldn't hold on to it. He was going to bring them back again. Pretty powerful. All right? And if for anything you get out of it, the love of God is what you get out. The prophets are where the love of God really resounds to me. And I know a lot of people go through the prophets and they only think of Jeremiah and Isaiah being about punishment.
Isaiah is the same thing.
Yeah, but the heart of God comes through in the way he cares. How intimately involved he is. How he's pleading and pleading. Just love me. I will take care of you. I will bless you. I will protect you. I will give you an everlasting inheritance. You will be with me. Please listen. Please. Are you getting that from going through the prophets now? Just over and over and over again.
It's the heart of a father.
Yes, it is. And it's awesome. So anyway, I know that it's a very... and then, of course, in it, there's this one other theological line I got to get to, which was the line that broke my heart again. When I first went through, I got hit with this. And of course, it's funny, David, me and you had this conversation today, and I didn't mean for this to come up, but what also hit me here was abortion. You say, how did abortion hit you here? Well, then he says, you slaughtered my children. Something that I had never perceived or entered my mind. And I thought, you slaughtered my children. That's how he felt. When they started off doing these sacrifices, he's watching them slaughter his little babies that he cares about. And how broken he is over it. And also how angry he is over it. And of course, what does that hit me? I live in a time where 33% of my generation has been murdered to the god of selfishness. Just imagine it. Imagine how he feels, how just his heart is broken over all those. And they're with him. And he raises them. And he cares for them. It's an incredible thing. So I don't know. I know it's dark and it's difficult, but it's the love of God. Because again, why would the Creator, the all-powerful, almighty, beginning and the end, care this much and feel this much about us? Why would he allow himself to be rejected? Why would he allow himself to be abandoned and hurt and stabbed in the heart? Why? Because his desire is affection. The only answer to the question is, what is he after?
Love.
He's after love. There's no other reason for him to do any of this. There's no logical, conceptual understanding that you come up with to make sense of it other than emotion and feeling. And I really, I guess, this chapter is a preaching chapter. It brings it out in me. This is where I have fun. I did a message on this a long time ago. I don't know how long ago. I should probably bring it back. People wouldn't, probably like half the church wasn't even there. That was probably 6-7 years ago, maybe longer. And but I could feel it like it was, wasn't that long ago when I started talking about it. So anyway, but the heart of God is just pouring out. And if anything you get out of it, I think that's the most important part. All right, so let's look at the notes. In the midst of all these messages of judgment, there is a beautiful picture of God's love revealed in chapter 16. The broken heart of God is here revealed to his wife Israel and Judah, who does not want to bring judgment, but mercy if only they will repent. And even after they do that, he'll take them back. And then, of course, it likens to Hosea, which you went through. I wasn't with you then, but I'm sure Dad brought that all out to you. In Hosea, you remember when you guys first went to Hosea? What was that? Probably like 2 months ago or something, a month and a half ago. And you remember being kind of like weirded out or a little like, how could God ask him to do this? Like, what?
Oh, yeah.
With Hosea and Gomer, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, Lord. And he wanted him to feel what he feels. Right? It's very much the same. Okay. Ezekiel 16 verse 8. Then I passed by you and saw, and behold, you were at the time for love. So I spread my skirt over you and covered your nakedness. I also swore to you and entered into a covenant with you so that you became mine, declares the Lord God. The eagles and the cedar, chapter 17. This illustrates the foolishness of King Zedekiah in rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar and would ultimately bring destruction on Jerusalem. Of course, it's a lot of elaborate word picture to give a simple message. He's talking about this great, a cedar and all of this, and yet they're trying to, he paints this picture of impossible odds, that the authority has been given. And the message is the authority has been given to Nebuchadnezzar. And that's it. And it won't be changed. Accept that or suffer the consequences. Always hope. In the midst of all this doom, God always offers hope, for he is compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. God promises that he will one day bring Israel back from all the places where he had scattered them and entered into judgment with them and bring them back into their own land and reconcile them to himself. What a wonderful privilege it is to be alive today to witness this prophecy being fulfilled. It is awesome. Chapter 18, the soul who practices sin will die. Each man will bear his own iniquity. The ways of the Lord are right, and the ways of Israel wrong. The Lord takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. Turn from the wicked ways and live. Now I love in this, when he's going about the righteous man who, you have the sinful man who doesn't care about God's law and lives in wickedness, but turns and repents and turns away from his wicked ways, will be saved. It's talking about turning back to God and repenting and being changed. And the Lord's grace in that he will accept you. And then he talks about, and then you have the righteous man who is right and follows my laws and follows my covenants and cares about me and then turns away to wickedness and corrupts his ways. He will die. Now he's also talking about not just in the physical at this time, he's talking about eternal. All right? Meaning that, but also I love the picture of the Lord's grace in, a wicked man who lives wickedly, completely. And if he turns away from his wickedness and turns to the Lord and receives his ways, the Lord will forgive him. Yeah. We wouldn't, but the Lord would. Right? Yeah. It still astonishes us that how he forgives the way he does. It still astonishes us that, he'll still take you at the last second when you turn to him because he just can't help it.
The cross.
Right? But I love that picture because, of course, there's only grace in the New Testament. Baloney. He is a graceful God. And I love that picture that he goes into. How even in the Old Covenant, if a wicked man turns and rejects his ways and turns to the Lord and repents, the Lord will forgive him and will bless him. It's an awesome picture of forgiveness and the grace of God. All right. I got 10 minutes. So the soul who practices sin will die. Each man will bear his own iniquity. The ways of the Lord are right, and the ways of Israel are wrong. The Lord takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. Turn from your wicked ways and live. I love that. And the Lord, do I take any pleasure in the death of anyone? That's what the Lord says in that chapter, and it's so clear. He's making the point that I don't rejoice when people die. I don't rejoice when someone has to die.
He also gives a warning that you shouldn't rejoice.
No. And that's a great point, David. He doesn't just say that he doesn't. He's making it clear that sometimes we have to kill and sometimes we have to. But we should never rejoice over it. It's never something to be happy about. Just like war is very necessary, but it's not something to be happy about, is it? Because we're all can't wait for the Lord to rule and reign so war will finally be done away with. But as long as mankind we are here, we will have it, and there's no way around it, right? He's making the point that the Lord does not rejoice over the death of anyone. And I think that's a very theological point because people like to paint him as, rejoicing over, punishing the wicked. Well, and that's why I believe that in that chapter, because the Lord is pronouncing these judgments, he throws in the emotional aspect as well too. I'm not happy when I have to punish someone. I never rejoice over the death of anybody. And I think it's a profound point.
That's a good judge because the weight of the decision is clearly upon him.
Yes, exactly. Is this my water? I had a water. This has no label on it. I don't remember taking the label off.
At least it's not the coffee cup you left there.
Oh, hopefully nobody had any, I'm a person who cares about germs or anything like that. I always figure I can trample on scorpions and drink poison for the gospel's sake, so I'm not worried about it. I've never cared about that. But then in the last couple of years, multiple times I've gotten strep. And I'm a little more wary now because of that sneaky strep that always seems to be around.
Don't put your God to the test.
Yeah. We love you, Lord. I trust you, Father. Oh, Lord, I can't wait until we finally kill that little sneaky virus. It seems to like me for some reason. Okay. So So, I'm in 19. Lamentation for the princes of Israel. Jehoiakim taken to Egypt and Zedekiah taken to Babylon. No one left to rule. And that's the picture. And of course, you know how, now remember, another important detail here. Just like Isaiah and just like Jeremiah, it is not all chronological. So everybody understands that now, by now, right? It's not that Ezekiel wrote 1, 2, and 3. And, that was his call. But then his prophecies were not all written down in a chronological manner through his life. They were all different visions and prophecies on different scrolls of Ezekiel the prophet. And he had scribes too, later on would write them down, right? It doesn't mean that they were all just, this was the first one, then this one came next week, and this one was 2 years later. And no, they then tried to compile them in some kind of cohesive manner. They're not following a chronological order. Does everybody understand that? Okay. I know I've said it 100 times, but it's important to get. They try to, with things that they clearly see that happened when they were younger, and things that, like, they do try. The translators, later on, would, and I don't mean our English translators. I mean those who compiled, Ezra, the priest, who was compiling the writings into the canon, right? They did put some thought into it. I wasn't there, but they put some thought into how they're going to put them out. But you know what I mean? And before that, there was already compiled of the prophecies of Isaiah and the prophecies and the visions of Ezekiel, the prophet of Israel, right? So, but the point is, so different people through time started to compile them and try to put them in some kind of order. But they weren't all written in a chronological manner originally. So there's no way to get that. Ezekiel chapter 1 was Ezekiel's first experience, and then the last one is Ezekiel's last prophecy. That's not exactly how it is. Think we're clear about that?
Yep.
Okay. So, chapter 20. I only had you read to 20, and I have 6 minutes left. That's a travesty. I'm always supposed to try to have you ahead of me. See, you doubted that I would have got this far, didn't you? You're probably thinking, there's no way he's going to get all the way there. Chapter 20, verse 1 through 32. The elders of Israel, the exiles, came to Ezekiel to inquire of the Lord. He is given the word to speak. It is a lengthy word which recapitulates all of God's workings with Israel in the desert and their continual rejection of his love and his statutes. And when they came into the land, they were even worse, rebelling against him continually to offer sacrifice on every hill. Thus the Lord said, his judgment has been decreed, and he will not be sought by them. However, in verses 33 through 49, again, every single time, he gets angry and he pronounces his judgment. And then at the end, he promises that I will not be angry forever. The Lord offers them a promise of restoration, that after he has dealt with their sin in the wilderness of exile, verse 36, and scattered them throughout the nations, he will again have compassion on them and bring them back to Israel. This is the restoration of the end of the age for the following reasons. Now, why is that always being clear about separating why it is the one at the end of the age and why it isn't? It's a good theological question. If you've been paying attention, you might have picked up on it. I know it's a little tricky one, but there's a reason why we always make sure we point that out. Good job, Casey. Yes, because there's 2. Yes. But why would we feel the need to defend that all the time?
Because most people preach that it already happened.
Now, not most,
Yeah, where are those?
but a bunch.
Right.
Not most. Thank God it's not most. But you're exactly right. You're onto that, Regina. So, hey, you guys all had pretty good answers there. Because of replacement theology and dominion theology, which you can't have dominion theology without replacement theology. One is built on that. That's a foundation, and that's just the house built on top. But here's the deal. Here's why. Because the prophecies, all of the prophets that we've been reading, if they're all literal, meaning 1948 and 1967, where they're fulfillments for the ones at the end of the age, and there was ones considering the first thing, if that's the case, then that means this is the last generation and it is now the regathering of Israel to bring about the millennial reign of Messiah. So if you don't believe in any of that, and you believe the church is now Israel, and Israel has been cut off from their covenant, right? Guess what? You have a problem. So what do they believe? They believe that all of this, everything we're reading in Isaiah, Jeremiah, and now Ezekiel, all happened in the first exile, the 70 years going to Babylon, and then once in 70 AD, it was the end. None of this was for 1948, 1967. They don't even believe that modern Israel is Israel. It's a fake, it's a farce, it's a scheme of the enemy, they believe. And there's charismatic, supposed Bible-believing Christians who teach and preach this. And a lot of them are out there in revival networks preaching dominion theology, and this is their theology. But just a lot of Christians don't know it. See, to me, that's offensive theology. I love you as a believer, and I hope to see you in heaven, but I have to pray against that wicked thing, because it's wrong and it's heretical. I have to. I hope you see it, and I hope the Lord wakes you up, and if you turn, He will. But that is twisting Scripture. And you'd be surprised how many people, to get to an all-millennial, post-millennial, dominion, preterist position, any of those positions, you all have to have that same foundation to do it. Now, the last 2 months, you spent a lot of time reading this stuff. Do you see any wiggle room there? We haven't even gotten to Zechariah, who has a lot of the same prophecies, and he prophesied after. Wow, I hit the mic close to my mouth. Wow, see how big a difference there is there. Zechariah is after the exile, and he prophesies the same stuff. Yeah. But I want you to see it, all right? That it's not being genuine with Scripture at all. It's really twisting it. Now, is there a lot of them who just have been taught this in their cemetery and that time I didn't even fix it. Usually I would say seminary, but I got that from a good old friend, John Meehan, Travis's father, who always would say stuff like that. He actually is the one who said seminary to me probably 30 years ago. Well, I'm only 35, so okay, fine, maybe 25 years ago. All right, and I've never forgotten it because the truth is a lot of seminary theology is dominion, preterism, all millennial. Not all. Thank God they've been delivered, and there's a lot of new, real Bible-believing Christians who have recognized Israel. There's a good 40%. Thank you, Lord. But the point is, the fact that the nation has been birthed, that Jerusalem has been taken back, and that all the world is coming against them, and you supposedly believe in this book, and yet don't see it, or not even don't see it, completely reject it. That is a heart attitude. That's something in there that is twisted. Now, a lot of them have just been taught it, and they're re-espousing what they've been taught. Right? Now, the leaders of this, the leaders and the teachers who really promote this stuff and who have studied the Word, who know it better than me, okay? They will be held accountable for that. They will be. Thank God, I believe right now we're getting to a time where it's becoming so obvious that many of them are going to have to wake up and see it. They're going to have to. The more the world comes against Israel, and the more it's all about the Temple Mount, you have to. Right? I'm on chapter 20, so I could chase a rabbit because we're already cut up. Right? Anyway. But I just want you to see that, and you guys just made me proud with your answers there. I just asked you a flat-out difficult question, and you guys got it. Good job. But you've obviously been paying attention. See, in order to come to now there's full preterist, partial preterist, and a lot of partial preterists are dominionists. And what does preterism mean? The past. Right? That all happened in the past. So, Book of Ezekiel, we all wrap that up in the past. See that?
Gifts of the Holy Spirit. Oh.
No, except for, and then even like we get to the third temple, the end of Ezekiel, the last 8 chapters are this incredible temple that's the size of like New York City. All right? And, yeah, well, that's just an allegory. That's not literal. He's got the dimensions, he's got all the scales, but that's just the, all right? That's what they'll say, because there's no way to fit it into their theology. All right? So, if anything, painstakingly going through all these prophets and all the, hearing the word prostitute and harlotry every 5 seconds for the last 3 months, if anything it got through is the Lord is fulfilling His word literally. Amen? All right. So, please read to chapter 40. Now, do you have a lot of reading in the other class? No. All right, good. So then you can handle it, because the truth is, you see the pace we're on. We're going to get almost to that 40 mark next week. All right? So, please, don't just think, oh, he says that, and then he's only going to do 5 chapters. No, we are going to fly. We're going to get through a lot of it. So please read to chapter 40.